Okay, everybody. Welcome back. We've had three fantastic presentations, and like I was saying in the break, we're learning things that we didn't know, which is what I love most about Math the System. So we have three more presentations for you before lunch, and the next presentation is going to be the City on the Rise, Students Left Behind, Education Inequality in Nashville, Tennessee, and that's Vanderbilt University. Please welcome them.
Thank you.
Welcome to Nashville, capital city of Tennessee. Every day, children wake up before sunrise and go to school. They spend 8 hours away from home learning to read and write and prepare for their future. In a city where business is booming, students and families are promised that their hard work will pay off. One day, they'll graduate high school with the skills they need to build a career and live a happy, successful life. For some, this is true. For many others, this is not. Let's look at two public schools in the heart of Nashville. Both are run by the public school district, and both receive government funding. This is Hume-Fogg, one of the best high schools in the country. Hume-Fogg has dozens of college prep courses and highly qualified teachers. Nearly all their students graduate, and 78% go on to earn a college degree. 3 kilometers away sits Pearl-Cohn High School, where 13% of graduates earn a college degree. They have only 6 college prep courses, and few teachers stay more than 3 years. Most of Hume-Fogg students are white, and less than 10% come from a low-income background, while nearly all of Pearl-Cohn students are black, and 3/4 come from a low-income background. In a city that is thriving and makes big promises to students, why should any be left behind? The 35 stakeholder interviews we conducted for this project all revealed the jarring realities of disparities within our school. In Nashville, these disparities are a product of an interconnected system that hinges on 3 main causes: racially segregated housing, inequitable school funding, and barriers to school choice. But before exploring these root causes, we'd like to introduce you to an extraordinary Hume-Fogg graduate, Savannah Ray, a passionate Black Indigenous student who grew up in a low-income neighborhood. Savannah experienced some of the best that the public schools have to offer, as well as some of the worst. She was on a path to Pearl-Cohn, but unlike her friends, was redirected to Hume-Fogg, and this radically changed her future. We are a team of education policy master's students from Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, and we spent the last several months investigating how Nashville systems impact students like Savannah. Let's start with the people. This is the vast network of stakeholders within Nashville's education system. Whether directly or indirectly, all of them have impacted how Savannah and her friends experience Nashville public schools.
Before Hume-Fogg, Savannah attended schools with primarily other students of color. This is because Nashville's neighborhoods are largely segregated. Though the U.S. Supreme Court required schools to integrate in 1954, white families fled to the suburbs and bought houses in these areas with federal loans. Black families were denied loans in these same areas. At the same time, poor Black families were displaced from their downtown Nashville homes due to large-scale demolition for urban development. These families moved to the only location available, low-quality housing in segregated neighborhoods. Today, economic growth perpetuates these decades-old housing patterns, as gentrification and rising costs reinforce segregation of neighborhoods by race and wealth. This is why Savannah, like many other Black Nashvillians, attended predominantly Black schools. Now, Savannah is a rare case. Because Savannah had exceptional test scores, she was assigned to a talented classroom within her school. From here on, she was on a path to Hume-Fogg, a choice that was presented to her parents by her teachers and that her parents had the opportunity to choose for her. Her friends would continue to Pearl-Cohn, the local neighborhood school. Nashville boasts about its universal choice policy, which means that any family in this public school district can choose any public school within the district. However, there are barriers to accessing this choice. The district does not provide transportation outside of neighborhoods, and the public transportation system in Nashville is wholly inadequate. Savannah had to drive 40 minutes, and it cost $20 a day to park outside of Hume-Fogg. Additionally, the fear of not belonging keeps families from choosing schools outside their neighborhoods, and language and information barriers make the choice system very complicated for other families. Though Savannah is bright and a hard worker, opportunity allowed her access to information and peer group networks that opened up the world of choice for her. Additionally, funding drives inequity. Tennessee is ranked 44th in the nation in per-pupil funding. And while Nashville attempts to compensate for the lack of resources, students are not getting what they need. Savannah experienced inadequate resources firsthand. At her school before Hume-Fogg, they were unable to incentivize high-quality teachers, and for a year she was without both a history and a science teacher. At Hume-Fogg, Savannah had access to well-resourced classrooms, and when the school wanted to spend beyond its budget, the Parent-Teacher Association was able to raise additional funds. The Parent-Teacher Association at Pearl Cone does not have access to the same community wealth, given its generally low-income student population. And when well-resourced families want to utilize school choice to leave low-performing schools, they take with them both public funds and this private wealth, which further segregates Nashville's schools. Wealthy schools are able to provide additional opportunities for students, while schools with low-income student populations struggle to meet the basic needs of their students, needs that are not filled by city social services, and needs that take time and resources away from academics. While Nashville attempts to fund its schools equitably, the students are not receiving the resources they need that lead to equal outcomes.
Many stakeholders have tried to solve these problems, but efforts have largely fallen short. The city has implemented inclusive housing laws and created a few mixed-income housing developments, but state policy has actually restricted these movements. Nashville has also expanded school choice in the past 2 decades, but there are too many barriers for all students to access the different options. And finally, Tennessee's education funding formula is outdated and confusing. In the past 30 years, Tennessee's student demographics have changed drastically, meaning that the current funding allocations don't really meet the needs of the current students. These solutions leave us with 3 gaps. 1 is that the solutions neglect families and communities. 2, policies don't fully understand the full needs of disadvantaged students. And 3, the recent economic growth has not reached low-income communities in Nashville. So to address our first gap, we recommend that the district create an accessible web page that has all the information they need to know about the school choice process and options. And in the long term, the district should be partnering with museums and sports teams to host pop-up events at their schools. These actions can help reframe the schools as community centers for all the city's residents to go to. And to address our second gap, policies are another really powerful lever for change. Right away, the district should create stipends to attract high-quality teachers to move into the low-performing schools. And in the long term, the state should be repealing its harmful housing policies and instead offer tax breaks to encourage more mixed-income developments. And over time, these actions will create more integrated neighborhoods and equitable schools. And finally, since Nashville's businesses have benefited so much from the recent economic boom, they're in a strong position to reinvest in Nashville's future workforce. So immediately, the district should be partnering with these businesses to create more mentorship programs and internship programs for students, and allow them to provide more direct services to the students as well. And over time, the city should require that all new businesses that come into the city to have a hiring floor for district graduates. These efforts will help create a diverse and sustainable school-to-career pipeline.
Last month, Savannah graduated high school. Despite enormous barriers, she has a bright future ahead of her, off to American University in the fall. As she walked across the stage, she felt a sense of loss for her friends with fewer opportunities, some without college and career plans, some who dropped out of school, and some who lost their lives to gun violence. In Nashville, there's a pattern in who succeeds and who doesn't, not by intelligence and not by merit, but by privilege and resources. Factors outside the school building, including housing, funding, and school choice, all have profound impacts on the student experience. Nashvillians believe in the American dream, that hard work leads to success. But by attributing students' challenges to their own lack of effort, we are blinding ourselves to the real barriers they face. Changing systems also means changing hearts and minds, not just of lawmakers, but of communities at large. Doing this takes us one step closer to equity for all. Students don't fail, systems do. Thank you. Do one of you want the clicker? I'll hold it. Never mind. I'll hold it. Come a little closer. Yeah, no, you can stay. No, you can stay there. It's good.
We are ready for your questions.
Thank you so much for that. Just to kick off the questions, I'd love to hear how you would describe what the current system is producing right now, just in a short bit, and then talk about how you would like, what change you would like to see in the system and what that would produce if you could enact some of those interventions you mentioned.
So right now, in the past year, the Tennessee Higher Education Commission actually published a report that said that only 56% of students in high school go to college in Tennessee. And so we would like to see that number increase because in the United States, it's currently essential for students if they would like to achieve a minimum, not a minimum, the median wage across the country to go to college and get a higher education degree. The difference between people who do not attend college and the people who do is approximately double the salary. And so we would like to see schools that ultimately prepare students for higher education, as well as schools that prepare students with basic literacy, which we are struggling to see also in the state of Tennessee, because less than 33% of students in third grade are literate.
I think we would also like to add that there are profound inequities in who succeeds and who doesn't in Nashville. Currently, Black and Hispanic students are on average 2 grade levels behind their white peers in math and reading. Additionally, Black and Hispanic students graduate at lower rates, matriculate to college at lower rates, and are much more likely to be chronically absent or drop out of high school. This is the inequity that we based our project around, and we would love to see these gaps close, as well as a general increase in student achievement.
Okay, I'm going to ask you the same question pretty much that I asked you before, which maybe means that you didn't totally resolve it last time. So I'm going to ask it again and maybe in a different way. So what I asked before was, is school choice a good policy? But I'm going to elaborate a little bit. So you'd set up housing, funding, and school choice as your 3 drivers of inequality, and you've said school choice isn't working. So I'd like you to talk about what school choice working means. And then also, you know, in your previous response, you sort of talked about sort of a perfectly functioning market where everyone has full information, there's no barriers of entry, everyone can have their choice. But if we imagine that other parts of the system are sticky, so that there's still large inequalities between schools, everyone can now want to try to put their kid into the best school, how then would you sort out that over interest in everyone trying to put their kids into a stronger school, let's say, or one that has better teaching? So what does school choice working really mean? And then let's say you had that perfect kind of competition or that perfect market, how would you then make a secondary choice about something that's oversubscribed?
So Caitlin and I both were actually high school teachers, and we both taught in choice schools. We have over a decade of teaching experience in both charter and magnet schools in Indiana, Wisconsin, and California. And we would argue that our schools that we taught at had effective choice systems. We used demographic-based lotteries so that students were represented demographically in terms of race and socioeconomic status. Our schools did not have thresholds that required certain standardized test scores to attend our schools. And additionally, our schools had transportation accessible to any students in the district to attend those choice schools. And so we do believe that if done properly and if done well and certain measures are addressed, then yes, school choice can be beneficial for all students. However, in the state of Tennessee, as you've mentioned, there are school inequities. And I think that goes to our funding challenges, because ultimately, currently what's happening is wealthy parents use choice to take funding outside of schools. especially the ones that are underachieving. However, if we use certain levers that we mentioned, such as corporate sponsorships, to give all of those school resources to underperforming schools, then we aren't necessarily depending on wealthy parents to bring in additional donations and funding to those schools. So while it is a sticky mechanism, especially in the way that it currently works, we do believe that there are opportunities for levers to address it and fix it.
Thank you very much. I would just like to focus on one specific thing that you mentioned about moving high quality teaching from sort of the high economic status schools to the lower economic status schools, but you also mentioned a big problem with retention. Did you look at anything in the system that would improve retention of those good quality teachers?
Yes, so absolutely. Funding is a huge part of teacher retention. The reason why there is such high levels of school turnover, of teacher turnover in low-performing schools is because many of these teachers do not have the resources, be that classroom supplies for students who may not afford to bring their own notebooks, pencils, and pens to class, or a lack of professional development for teachers because all the resources in that school are dedicated to Band-Aid solutions for students who are in crisis. As a result, teachers who enter into these schools face very difficult circumstances. They don't have the resources or training necessary to respond to the challenges they face, and as a result, they either drop out of teaching as a profession or they move on to a higher performing school where they don't have to deal with these same challenges. We believe that stipends are a way to incentivize teachers, at least in the short term, to be attracted to these lower performing schools, to want to teach there. And we believe, hopefully in the long term, if we have more equitable funding, that these resource gaps can be resolved, where suddenly these teachers don't have to worry about paying out of their own pockets to buy notebooks and pencils for their students so that they can learn. They don't have to worry about being the only kind of counseling that a student who's undergone traumatic past from gun violence, from poverty, from homelessness, the only person that they can turn to. If those resources are provided in other parts of the school, all of a sudden they get to focus on what they love, which is teaching, and they will be resourced to do that effectively.
So just want to say what an amazing technical analysis that you've all done. And I want to maybe just zoom into the process that you went through and just ask a little bit around, through your engagement, through your methodology, how do you feel like you embrace the complexity and the messiness of the system rather than reducing it through your mapping? So just a little bit, if you can tell a little bit of narrative of that, because there's always a risk with systems mapping to start to treat the system like a machine rather than a living system. So any reflection, that would be great.
So we actually spent the first few weeks of our project just thinking about all of the different stakeholders that we can list. As education policy students who all work in advocacy organizations, Juliana and I work at an organization that works on the state level. Caitlin is involved in a school board campaign that she runs. Sam and Andrew are both involved with nonprofits. We really strived to draw out all of the stakeholders we could think about and then prioritize which ones we wanted to go to first. So ultimately that led us to speaking to legislators, to various nonprofit leaders that worked with parents, that worked with schools, that worked with corporations, and ultimately also students and teachers as well. And so it was very challenging in the beginning to think about how to best approach it, because we feel that with schools, oftentimes people start with the student experience, but mapping is about really stepping back and looking at the broader picture. And so we had to push ourselves to not think just about the daily experiences that students face, but also just every single stakeholder that plays a role in the day-to-day processes.
Thank you for your presentation. I just want to say, I just want to find a bit more about the hearts bit that you talked about towards the end, because your recommendations are very logical and kind of cognitive. I'm really interested in what you found out in talking to people around the emotional and what they're deeply invested in that means things become stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing that we care very deeply about, perhaps more deeply than anything else, is the role that schools play in communities. We believe that part of the reason why Nashville schools are currently failing from a standpoint of equity is because we don't have the kind of community investment in the schools that we desire. I can tell a case study about a school called Wond'ry in Nashville. It was the first school to integrate. It was a beacon of kind of what was good about Nashville, a step in the right direction. Wond'ry closed in 2020 because it did not have enough students to fill its seats, because parents who attended that school left to go to different neighborhoods to attend charter schools or to attend private schools. We think that that kind of disinvestment from schools as part of the community is what allows us to have such an inequitable system. We believe that having policies such as creating community events, museum events, sports teams, hosting events at schools is a way to frame schools not just as a place where you send your child for 8 hours a day to be educated, but a community center that everybody in a neighborhood can get behind. We think that reframing the way that Nashville citizens look at schools is the first step to making them understand the importance of equity in education. We think that if we can change hearts as well as minds, that we can get people to care about the issues that we see here, the issues that we are trying to bring into our work, to our lives, and we hope that other people can be as passionate as we are about this issue of equity in Nashville.
Thank you very much, Vanderbilt University. Great job.